All right, hello, welcome to class 12. Today we're going to be talking about sports injuries and medication. The first topic we're going to be talking about is sports injuries. We're going to be covering a vast number of subtopics. I'm going to leave it on to Amy to cover the first one.
So the first sports injury we're going to be diving in depth into is concussions. So what are concussions? They're a pretty broad sports injury, which means that any kind of brain injury caused by impact counts as a concussion. So for example, if you knock your head into a soccer ball or knock your head against another head, then that counts as a concussion because you're impacting your brain with somebody else or something else. And this is very common in American football, hockey, rugby, and soccer, and those are all contact sports. It will be hard to find these in sports like tennis, for example, just because your opponent is on a different side from you, so it's less likely to happen. And in football or American football, brain injuries count for 65 to 95% of all fatalities. So basically, if you are going to get injured playing football, you most likely are going to get a concussion. And sports in general, they account for 300,000 concussions per year. So if you are getting a concussion, it's very likely that you have gotten it from playing a sport. And they're described as mild just because they typically don't cause death, but that doesn't mean that they're not serious. You have different grades, so you have mild, moderate, and severe. And if we go into the next slide, we can talk more about those effects. So short term, you have headaches, temporary loss of consciousness, so that means like you pass out, delayed responses. Sometimes you'll see people or players who get hurt, they'll shine like a little light in front of your eyes and they track your movement of your eyes as you follow the light. If you're not tracking it really well, that's pretty much an indicator that you have a concussion because that's a delayed response. You might have ringing in your ears, blurred vision, or sensitivity to light and sound, loss of balance, crankiness, fatigue, basically like you'll feel more tired or more irritable. Long term wise, you might have memory or concentration difficulties, depression. It'll be hard for you to smell or taste things, and you might even have personality changes. Something I didn't mention here, but is also relevant, is that there has been a case where I think it was a high school football player. He got a concussion 2 times, and it was so severe that he lost the ability to speak very well. So his speech basically became impaired, and it was hard for him to speak clearly. And only about 20% of people might suffer from post concussion syndrome, where that means that they continue to experience symptoms after 6 weeks. And another thing that's important to notice is that it's cumulative, which means the first time you get a concussion, provided it's not like you slamming your head into a wall, it won't be too bad. But if it happens consistently, like you're playing football, then it's a bigger deal. So next slide. Um, and like I said before, typically 20% of people who have concussions, after like 7 or 14 days, it'll resolve by itself. That means like it'll basically be over, you'll be fine. And they should never return to sports or any other physical activity sooner than 1 week. Because what a concussion does is that when you have a concussion, your brain is like, it's basically like jiggling in your skull, which means that it's already injured and it's healing itself. So if you get injured during that time, then it's like um, 2 times the impact. It's 2 times as worse. And how will you know if you're getting better? You'll have no more symptoms, even after exercise. So if you're doing a push-up or you're jogging, your brain shouldn't hurt. You shouldn't be like feeling tired or irritated again. Another thing that's important to notice is that your memory and concentration should be regained. Hopefully, if it's not too serious, after 2 weeks, everything will be back to normal. And this is just something that's pretty interesting. There was a case study done on Aaron Hernandez. You might have heard of him before, you might not have. He's a famous football player. He plays in the NFL. And he was actually a convicted murderer, which means that he killed somebody. And after he died, we actually got to study his brain. And this picture here is a picture of his brain compared to a normal brain. And you can see that there's a very clear difference. His brain is more shrunken, there's less of that white stuff. And this is what scientists believe to be a result of concussions. So, like we said before, if you have multiple concussions, you might have personality changes. And what people actually saw is that Aaron Hernandez, the part of his brain that was most damaged, was actually the part of his brain that's important for making decisions. So that's just something cool to know.
Hello and welcome to my slide. My slide is going to be mainly talk about strains and sprains. Rhymes, doesn't it? Anyways, so sprains and strains. These are probably one of the most common types of injuries of which you will usually get in athletics. It doesn't matter what kind of sport you're doing, you will usually get a strain or a sprain. And these injuries involve you stretching your tissue or tearing your tissue. How you can do that is, for example, when you sprain your ankle, sometimes when you sprain your ankle, basically when your foot twists too far into one certain direction or twists a little bit too much, some of the tissues of which was holding your foot together could maybe tear or maybe get really stretched, which causes them to be strained or sprains, which also causes you to get a sprain sometimes. That's what usually it means. That's because and when you strain your tissues, that usually causes the injury, the aforementioned injuries. However, what in the strain slash sprains, these injuries can cause you to have lesser movement and be a little bit more tired. Usually, so sprains usually occur in the ligaments. These are usually connecting bone to bone. So as I've already mentioned, if you maybe twist your foot, that would actually involve a strain. That's because it involves muscles and tendons, which connect from muscle to bone. Now, I want to discuss about something really important. Sometimes, usually nowadays, people really don't care too much about sprains. That's because they're so often of an occurrence that when people see that you get a sprain or you get an injury that is close to a sprain, many people assume that, oh, it's just a sprain, walk it off. However, that shouldn't always be the case because sprains and, of course, strains, both of these injuries mimic very certain injuries of which are caused by other injuries. So actually, no, I should rephrase that. These injuries cause very certain symptoms to develop, of which are very close to other injuries. So, for example, if I were to sprain my ankle, I might not really be able to walk with that foot for a decent amount of time because if I were to sprain my ankle, my foot would hurt every time I took a step. And that could be true for a sprain. However, what happens if it wasn't just a sprain? What happens if I fractured a bone? That is one of the key points of which I want to make here. That's because saying it's just a sprain, what's the big deal, is not a good idea, considering that if it isn't because how sprains can mimic the symptoms of other injuries, very other more dangerous and more harmful injuries, this can cause you to basically feel very bad, especially. That's because how if you ignore it like you would a sprain. So if I were to ignore a fractured bone just like I would ignore a sprain usually, it could cause horrible long-term effects for my body. Thank you. So now this is just going to detail uh, the severity of the sprain slash strain of which you might get. So there's three grades mainly here. You got the mild, the moderate, and the severe. And starting off with mild, this is mainly just your tissue is stretched. You usually get slight swelling. This is mildly noticeable. This is mainly because your body's trying to heal that certain area, and that's some inflammation right there to maybe calm it down. We have mild loss of motion and strength. This is mainly because it's injured, your body is right now still trying to recover, and so it won't be at its max functionality or its max potential because it's still trying to heal and it's just trying to just get back to its normal way of movement. And of course, right now, if it's just a mild version, there is actually no decrease in stability. So it's not like you're limping. Now we can move on to moderate, which is it involves some stretching. However, it also involves some tearing as well. Now, this is going to get you some moderate swelling. So it's actually a pretty big lump. It's baseball size. And usually this includes bruising, which that's because whenever when you tear tissue, it's going to let blood out. Actually, no, I wouldn't say let blood out. However, it causes more injury under the skin, which causes the bruising to occur. Then you also have more loss of your range of motion. So instead of moving from 0 to 25%, you now got 25 to 75%, which is actually very harsh, especially when you're in sports. This can cause you for example, this can cause you to decrease in speed dramatically and can also cause limping. And yeah, and later in the fourth point, you got some decrease in stability. As I've already said, some limping. That's because whenever you sprain something like this, you're probably going to have a lot of the cells in that area trying to heal, especially the tissue there. Finally, we have severe. This is the this is a complete tear of the tissue. This is actually really bad for your body. That's because it will cause significant swelling and bruising. This means that your body is currently trying to heal a lot of tissue that has just been broken, and that tissue has created a big mess within your body, causing a lot of bruising and swelling. You have basically lost your range of motion in that limb. So you're reduced from a limp to what I would say is being put into a wheelchair. Sorry if that's a little bit offensive. However, yes, you are basically limited in the amount of motion of which many might consider. And you also basically your stability is gone. That's because if it was on, let's say, your foot or your at least your leg, if you were to have a severe strain on your leg, you would basically lose using that leg for as long as you were healing it. So that's why severe injuries are extremely dangerous and actually extremely bad for your body. So without further ado, let's move on to performance enhancers.
Performance enhancing drugs are used by athletes in sports. Performance enhancing drugs slash substances are substances that are used to improve any form of activity performance in humans. The use of performance enhancing drugs span the categories of legitimate use and substance abuse. So certain performance enhancers are universally classified as such, like anabolic steroids, while other substances like vitamins are almost never classified as performance enhancers. As usual with categorization, there are borderline cases such as caffeine. Types of sports enhancers. Stimulants. Stimulants are drugs that directly affect the central nervous system. They also speed up parts of the brain and body, increasing the heart rate, blood pressure, metabolism, and body temperature of the user. They are used by athletes to reduce tiredness and fatigue and to increase alertness, competitiveness, and aggressiveness. Anabolic steroids. Anabolic steroids are drugs derived from testosterone, a hormone which is produced in testes of males and to a much lesser extent in the ovaries of females. Testosterone is partially responsible for the developmental changes that occur during puberty and adolescence, is also involved in controlling the buildup and breakdown of the main biochemical components of all tissue, including muscle. Blood doping. Blood doping is the use of various methods and substances to increase the person's red blood cell mass. Higher levels of red blood cells in the blood result in more oxygen being transported to the muscles, resulting in increased stamina and performance.
So where are these like used in sports? In the 1980s, steroids and other sports enhancers began to spread throughout the general population, like used in recreational sports, all that. Even before the 1980s, these drug enhancers were used in like the Olympics, like big league sports events. Um, Now, there are many organizations out there that are trying to prevent these drug usage in sports. Now, the two main organizations that I'm going to introduce is the um, WADA. This organization was founded in 1999. This organization enforces rules across every sport: track, football, soccer, every sport across the world. This organization makes sports fair and equal for everyone um, when they force the rules for the sports and try to make all athletes follow those rules and not use any sports enhancers, sorry. Now, the second organization is the USADA. This organization was founded in 2000. Now, this organization was they're allowed to do drug tests on any athlete at any official sports event, like FIFA, World Cup, um, Olympics, any big official sports event. Now, obviously, here's Lance Armstrong. He was a pro cyclist. Um, he actually in the 1990s he was he won the Tour de France 7 times, which is a big cycling event. And during that time, he was accused of using sports enhancers to win. But during that time, he denied all those accusations. But then many years later, in 2013, with an interview with Oprah Winfrey, he actually came clean and admitted that he did use drugs to win the Tour de France competition.